It's recording. It's for sure recording. It is recording. This is Rob, and this is episode 45 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. But yeah, we release it every Sunday.
Okay.
And I was doing a bunch of research, like which day is best. There's got to be one day that's like the day to launch it. And the overwhelming feedback on podcasting is like it's more about that you're consistent than if it's like a certain day. And so as long as you're like consistently releasing on a weekly basis, your listeners will kind of key into what day you're launching.
Yeah.
And also I feel like I'm talking to you and your podcast is definitely bigger than mine at this point.
No,
I guarantee it. Yeah.
No way, dude. You have, what, 45 of them?
Well, yeah, the episodes are more, but okay, I'm sitting here with Chef Yia Vang. Here, let's go through the laundry list here. Owner of Union Mung Kitchen. You may have seen him on Bon Appetit magazine, named Best Chef by Minneapolis St. Paul magazine. He is opening Vinai in the spring, and already there's a ton of excitement behind it. And he is also one of the hosts of the White on Rice podcast, and that's what we were talking about. Yia, and this will be like the last third person thing I'm doing here. Yia is famous for his Hmong food, which I was going to say for those of you who tuned in, but this is our second recording of this episode. Last week we had this absolutely amazing conversation. The entire time my jaw was just on the floor, and I'm like, this is absolutely your story, the food.
So much pressure now, bro.
There's no pressure.
Now it's so pressure.
No, the pressure was the first one. Now it's like, but I got to the end of the recording. I hit the record button and looked down, and the mixer said, no memory card. And so after an hour and a half, there's no memory card. But this is how I know you're a super awesome dude. Is like right away, you're like, it's no problem. And I'm sitting here just like, heart in my stomach, like, no. And it's a weird mix of emotions because I had an amazing time. So personally, I hate wasting people's time. But you're like, no, I didn't waste my time. But then the last thing I was like, oh my gosh, people needed to hear that. So I'm really glad.
It's a lot of pressure now, though, to be like, ugh. How do you create something so organic and natural? No,
this just turns into a terrible episode.
Yeah.
We'll just be as pretentious as possible.
Yeah. I'll just do a lot of
where you close the eyes and talk actually.
Yeah. No, man, it was fun. I mean, I get it, dude. Like, man, everybody, messes up. Stuff like that happens all the time. I mean, in the cooking world, stuff like that happens all the time. You're going to have to figure out, it's super, like, here's a really kind of silly story. We made these pickles, right? But then when we went to this offsite catering for this like really wealthy dude, we didn't have any, we forgot to bring them, and I'm like, oh frick, like we forgot these pickles or whatever, whatever. And they're nothing special, they're just pickles. So I'm like, shoot, what do we do? But we still had cucumbers, so I'm like, okay, slice up the cucumber, throw in some Korean chili flakes in there. Let's make basically it's like a quick brine. So it's like honey, a little bit of vinegar, and some fish sauce and salt. And we're like, oh crap, we got to figure out a name for these. So I'm like, let's just call it a sweet and spicy pickles or sweet and spicy cucumbers or something like that. Tossed it up, whatever, and so we just totally just winged it. And at the end, I mean, like we spent hours on we roasted a suckling pig. We did all these things, right? We spent hours on all these things. And all the guests could talk about was these cucumbers or these pickles or whatever. I'm like, are you kidding me? I spent 8 hours on that suckling pig. And all you talked about is like, oh man, that cucumber stuff, that was amazing. What is it? Like, what's the recipe? And I'm like, I don't know, whatever we had because this was offsite, it was out in Guayzeta. So we're like, I don't know, whatever we had in the truck that we brought, It's
like you have to be known for these, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, no, but what about the pig? Oh, yeah, the pig was good, but, So I understand, man, like things like that happen all the time.
It's interesting when you create something that is it's different than what people have had. So suckling pig is like maybe someone's had something similar, but with cucumbers like that, they're just used to pickles. And so when something's as different as that, it shouldn't be the case.
Well, then we changed everything over to those. We did. We're like, okay, no more pickling. We can just do this on site. We just cut all this stuff up. We can toss it if you toss it 15 minutes, if you toss all that stuff 15 minutes before, just because of the acid and the salt and the sugar that you put in there, it basically quick brines it real quick.
Oh, with a rich fatty pig, that's got to be an awesome pairing too.
Well, it's so funny. Then we're just like, oh, I guess we're sticking with this. Like this is kind of our thing now. And so everyone always like, what's the recipe? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like 4 ingredients,
So you got this amazing new thing that you serve with all your sides. And what I got is I learned that this mixer still has a timer that goes even if there's not a memory card. So at least I learned that the light is red here. The timer is going. I'm still like 20% paranoid, but I'm feeling pretty confident that we're actually recording right now.
No, yeah, good. Hopefully we'll figure this out.
Yeah. So let's go back to what got you into food, because that is, I think, when we last talked, was everything kind of revolved. Food was a part of the picture, but it really was revolving around your upbringing and the Hmong culture and like what that means and how it reflects into the food and what led to the journey of starting Union.
Yeah. So, I got into food, like I think that everybody would love that story, like young age. Like I was like, standing on the ledge and, you're cooking with your mom or your dad or whatever, your grandma. That's really not how I got into food. Food was always just been a part of our family, our culture. Everything surrounded, like food is kind of the epicenter for celebration. It's the epicenter for gatherings. Even just dinner at home. Like we don't, like even growing up, and this is true for our family, even growing up, like eating dinner wasn't like, hey, everyone fend for yourself. Like mom made some stuff and you quote unquote make a plate or something. Like it wasn't that. It was this very systematic ritual where, when dad comes home from work, my mom had dinner ready and we all sit down and eat together. And, and so there was this actual, like, you stop time, you stop what you're doing, you come in and you eat dinner. And it wasn't like, oh, we did this 3 nights a week. It's every night. That's what, it was. Like breakfast, we kind of did our own because everyone went to school, dad was at work, mom went to work, lunch or whatever, but then dinner was really symbolic of like stopping everything and eating together. And it was a big part of our culture in growing up. Well, in growing up, it was like, if the rule was, if you cook, you don't have to do dishes. And I hated doing dishes. I love doing dishes now, because it's such a nice, it's just like putsy things to do with your hands so you can like zone out and think now. But before it was like, you're a kid, you're like, the moment you're done eating, you want to run back outside. Right. And so I ended up, just hopping in the kitchen and helping my mom, or, at one point in our lives, my mom was working second shift and my dad was working first. And then my dad would come home and he loved watching the news, even though he didn't understand English that well. My brother would sit by him and my brother would help translate the news because my dad loved kind of current events. And then while that was happening, he would kind of like tell me what to do in the kitchen. And so here I was trying to figure out like, oh, how do I cut this? And how do, how do I cook with this? And it's interesting because I watch some kids around the kitchen. I'm always like, oh, careful, hot. Oh, careful, sharp knife. But I'm like, oh, yeah, I was like 10 or 12. I was doing the same thing, That didn't really, he cared, but he was just like, okay, be careful. Just kind of do your thing. And so that's kind of how I got in. And then just culturally, we just don't, like when friends go, oh yeah, like I'm buying half a steer or whatever. It's like, oh, that's cute, or half or a quarter of a cow or whatever. You're like, what happens to the other 3/4? So we grew up just like every month, either every 3 weeks ish, we would be at some Amish farm or some kind of farm where they're like, hey, here's chicken, here's pig, here's cow, like go at it, and then we just buy it right there. Like I call it super wholesale, like it's really like, it's like, how when you pick your lobsters,
yeah,
and when you go to the store, that's what you do. You literally go in and you see, you see the herd or you see the group and you kind of just like, yeah, that's the one.
Are farmers chill with that? Could you just go to a farm and be like, oh, I want a cow?
Yeah, some farmers are, and it's a relationship that's been built for a while.
I saw an article recently, actually, that was pretty funny. That one of my other friends who's a chef posted.
Yeah.
That was like, COVID-19 making people realize they can go straight to the farm to get their food, and I'm like, but that's where the food's been coming from this entire time. Why is it's
absolutely?
There's the connection of food is insane. That it's so like new and novel that you could go to a farm to get your food, and yet farm to table is popular, and
Yeah.
yet farmers markets are popular,
Yeah.
but people would never think of going to a farm.
Yeah. So for some people, it's like a Saturday, let's go to the farmer's market, blah, blah, blah. For other people, that's just another Saturday, or this is just every day. This isn't like a special thing. We wake up at 10 a.m. to go farmer's market with our coffee and our scones. We got to go do that. And it's not that these other people go to the farmer's market. They go to like their backyard and just harvest,
Yeah.
And so I grew up easily around, like butchery, around, just around animals, blood, cutting, knife. As a kid, like most kids was learning how to like throw a spiral or throw like a curveball or throw a fast pitch or whatever, swinging a bat. I was, my dad gave me a boning knife, cut. He would trim these, he would help. They would break down these, animals into primals, and then as the kids, we would kind of gather around and we start kind of, cutting the chunks out and stuff like that. So I was very comfortable holding a knife by the time, like holding a knife, like boning, cutting things, by the time I was like 12, so it was like really comfortable for me.
Were your parents in the food industry, or were
No,
they?
we're just Hmong people, baby, bro. That's just what we do, man. I think that there is this mentality with Hmong people, especially the Hmong people that have come through the war, come from Laos, been through some really, really hard stuff, that there's just this, culturally, there's just this idea of preserving and kind of packing away. So instead of going like, hey, if we're going to, like my mom and dad are always like, if we're going to spend, like we're going to wake up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday to go out to a farm to do all this stuff, instead of killing one pig, why don't we just kill two? Just, instead of killing like one, like my dad's hilarious. Like and he still does it today. Like there's these Amish farmers that he's become good friends with in Wisconsin when they were still living in Wisconsin. So when he goes back, he'll literally drive past their farm and just say hi to them and goes, you guys got anything you guys want to get rid of? And they'll be, yeah, these three over here, we're kind of, thinking about getting rid of, or not getting rid of, but like processing them. My dad's like, I'll take them. And like just on a random weekend, my mom would send us pictures. Oh, your dad decided to kill two, 155-pound pigs, And
So when you get these two pigs, what's the next? Is he taking them live, or is he?
Well, yeah, he could do it himself, but or the farmers can just just shoot them.
And at that point, what are the next steps? Because this is
break it down. Just break it down, dude. It's so interesting because growing up, I just thought this was like a normal Saturday that every kid does. Like in like growing up, in middle school, high school. Which is like, hey, what did you do for your weekend? And my friends would be like, oh yeah, we went camping, we went to my cabin, we did this, and I was like, we killed a pig, and then everybody would think I'm like making a joke, and they would laugh at me. They're like, oh, like, you're so funny. And I'm like, yeah, we killed a pig. They're like, oh, okay, haha, we've heard that joke before. And I'm like, I don't understand why these people don't understand. So yeah, so
it's so funny that is considered not normal when there's this disconnect that people will eat meat but be like, I don't want to see it, and if you show it to me, I will be mad at you.
I met a girl in college who didn't realize what a whole chicken looked like. So I remember I was a freshman, sophomore in college. I was at a friend's house, and they're like, hey, and it was almost like a joke, like, haha, we bought a whole chicken, and everyone's like laughing. And I'm like, yeah, that's what you do, right?
Okay.
And everyone's just food. Like, yeah, well, everyone thought it was hilarious that they bought a whole chicken. They're like, I have no idea what to do with it. I'm like, I think I can figure something out. They're like, okay. And this is before everyone kind of knew that I cooked and crap. So I like, deboned it, like broke it down. And I remember this girl was like, oh my gosh, how do you know how to do that? And I'm like, how do you not know how to do this? And then on the other thing I thought, she was like, I never knew that like chicken breasts came from, where they came from.
Yeah.
Cause she's like, we always just get it, and it's like this really nice white meat that's like a chunk right there, I was like, yeah, here's the chicken breast, here's the thighs, here's the drummies. And she's just like blown away by chicken anatomy. And even like what's interesting is like, this is like the silliest thing, but like when we do whole fish, right? We've had people who say, hey, could you take the head off? When you guys do your whole fish, can you just cut the head off? And I'm like, okay, sure. They're like, it's just weird that an animal's looking at me while I'm eating it. And I'm like, okay.
I have a strong theory. This is because of Disney. I think.
Well, yeah, Disney did ruin a lot of things for us.
Growing up and watching Bambi and seeing all the animal friends.
Yeah, Finding Nemo. Yeah.
There's this emotional connection where you think that bears are these fun people in the woods when in reality they'll rip your face off.
Yeah. Yeah. And so growing up, it was, this is what we did. You know, if it was like plucking chickens, you know, like, and then if you go to any Hmong house, and this isn't bias, racist, whatever. It's not that. It's true. You go to any Hmong house, a lot of them will have deep freezers, like 2 or 3 of them. And it's just like freezing things away. So it's like if they have a big harvest from their garden, like they'll, you know, blanch a bunch of the string beans and then put them in Ziplocs and freeze them. And then they'll just pull them out, you know? So it's storage. So like Hmong, like the OG Hmong, you know, people like the older, like my mom and dad's generation, and even a little bit older, a little bit younger after that, when they buy homes, they always look. It's not about how beautiful the dining room is, how, you know, it's not like the bathroom where it's like, do we have like, you know, a screen-in porch, blah 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 blah. It's how big is the garage and how many deep freezers can we put in there? Because I tell people, if you want to sell homes to Hmong people. Right now, a lot of them buy 3-car garage, and they might only have 2 cars. They buy 3-car garage because the other side is just deep freezers, and it comes from this culture and this mentality of we didn't have much, and now we're in America where there is prosperity, and we want to be able to like never go hungry again.
Yeah,
and that's so enriched in our culture.
So when you're 12 years old and you're starting to get these knife skills and become really comfortable in the kitchen, where are you at? Where are you living? And how, like, is that where you grew up or what was? So
I spent my elementary years. We spent our elementary years in the West Coast, Pennsylvania. We lived in Lancaster County, which is like right with our neighbors are Amish Mennonite. And, you know, it's so interesting. I tell people that growing up there, it was, like our neighbor would bring over bread for us all the time because that's what they would make every day. This wasn't a fad. You know, like it wasn't the hipster kinfolk life or whatever. Like we're going to like play a scene like we're a Little House on the Prairie, but really like we love our iPhones kind of deal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This wasn't a fad. This wasn't a trend. They wasn't trying to get some likes on Instagram. This is what they did. You know, our one of our neighbors was a dairy farmer. So they literally, that's where I learned how to drink, like basically milk from the udder, you know? And it's like drinking whole cream. And then like when you have like, you know, regular milk, you're just like drinking white water, you know, and it had that grassy, earthy taste to it too, you know?
I grew up drinking skim, and when you have a cup of real milk, you're like, this is a different thing.
Yeah. You're like, why is my whole mouth feel like it's coated, you know? And so we did, and then we had farm lands that we just farm and stuff. And when I say farm, it's not like went to farmer's market. It was like for us. Yeah. And there's this ideology in Hmong culture where you do something, you actually do something not just enough for you, but you always do something enough for you and maybe a few other families, because it's that idea that we want to be able to provide not just for ourselves, but over abundantly. And it's really cool because I see that in the philosophy of my mom and dad. That like when they make dinner, they don't just go, just us two? Okay, so it's going to be 8 ounces of meat we're using, blah, 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 blah. It's they purposely make it so there's a lot left over because you never know when a person stop by the door, then you can offer them food.
That's a beautiful philosophy, because if everybody in a neighborhood thinks this way, everybody's always going to be taken care of.
Exactly.
But that's really just not the way things are anymore. That's more like, even if you're in an apartment building, it's like, I don't want to know my neighbors. Yeah. I don't want them to know who I am. I don't want to know who they are. And
and you only come to know your neighbor when there's a loud clashing noise or there's a weird smell. You know what I'm saying? It's like you only come out when when it's more about curiosity and not about hospitality.
Or it's usually anger first. That's the only time I'm going to bring it up.
So loud.
If you're inconveniencing me, that's when I'm going to bring it up. Where it's like, if you had met them first and learned they're a musician and this is their livelihood, then you'd be way more understanding if it's loud during this time and you can figure it out. And
definitely,
that's something I struggle with, because I definitely tend to be the person that when I move into a place, it's like, all right, this is my place.
Yeah.
And ironically, where I live now, it wasn't until COVID happened that my neighbor knocked on my door, was just like, hey, things are really weird. We're all in the back area. Do you want to hang out?
Yeah.
Actually, that sounds really nice. I haven't talked to
You're
like the third person I've seen in the last 3 weeks.
you're like the second human contact I've had. Yeah.
How'd you end up in Pennsylvania of all places?
So my parents, when we moved to America, so we were in the refugee camp. My parents they met in there in 77, 78, they got married. We left in 88. So they were there for like 10 years, a little bit over 10 years. I was born in 84. My oldest brother was born in 81. So we were there for a little bit. And then we moved to, we came to America, and through immigration and everything and refugee status, we ended up in St. Paul, moved out to Manitowoc a little bit, my dad's side. And then eventually I think my parents just wanted to get us out of kind of like the, I don't know, I don't want to call it inner city, but it was more like the rougher life, I think around that time in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of Hmong refugees that came in. And what happens when you have all this big immigrant group that comes in is, for housing sake, everyone just like, the government or, social programs would just kind of put them all in one place. When we have a bunch of especially young men that are unrest and they're in a spot where they feel discriminated, they feel all this stuff starts building up, and then that's how gangs start. That's how, it's just the reality and the fact of life. Like even like, and so the Twin Cities had some of the most dangerous high pop in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s there, had some of the highest, like hardcore, like, Hmong gangs in the, in the city, especially like, in St. Paul, East Side area there and stuff. And my dad just wanted to get us away from that. And so there's a small, tiny Hmong group out in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour 10 west of Philly. So it's like, it's weird because it's like Philly's like almost an hour and a half away, and sometimes it was considered like the suburbs of Philly. It's like, hour and a half? That's not a suburb. It's like here to Duluth. Like, Duluth is a suburb of, the Twin Cities. So we moved out there. Man, I spent my summers running around fields, playing alfalfa fields, hiding out in cornfields, turning into our forts and stuff like that. Yeah. And then we just, 8th grade, we moved back to Wisconsin, central Wisconsin area.
So moving away from the refugee camp at Ford, do you have any memories of that, or is that something that?
I have. Early? Like it's like memories in a way of you're not sure if it's a dream or not. You're like, is that really a dream? You know what I'm saying?
Like all memories, really.
Yeah. One of my most distinct memory is when we were in the plane. I didn't understand the concept of like a plane, right?
Yeah.
I was like 4 or 5. And we were on the plane, and my mom's like, we're going to America. And I'm like, oh, what? Okay. And I remember I sat down in this chair, and they put this nice lady with a uniform came in, like, help me put this like seatbelt on. I'm like, oh. And I thought I was going on this like amusement park ride type thing. And like, it got like, I remember everything was like shaky. Like, you're like a figure airplane. Like think of a 4 or 5 year old trying to figure out like the concept of an airplane. And then I remember she came up and like gave me this red can, and she's like, oh, this, like, and my mom and dad were like, oh, you drink that? And I'm like, what? And I opened this red can. Obviously it was Coke, right? Yeah. It's a commercial for Coke. And I felt like
it's a beautiful script of the commercial.
Like just like from the refugee camp to America freedom. And I remember I opened it and I drank it, and I've never tasted anything that sweet nectar once it like hit your lips, and you're just, and all that like, that, high fructose corn syrup. Yeah. And it hits, and that fizz, it burned, but it burned so good. And it was like going down. And I was like, if this is what America tastes like, I want it. Yeah. And it was, I remember I was like, what is this thing? And, my mom's like, oh, it's, like soda or, whatever. And I'm like, this thing's so great. And I just like savored it. And I remember I like fell asleep, and then we walked out these big iron doors. And I remember my mom saying to me, hey, we're in America. And I'm like, wow, going to America is not that hard. You sit on a chair, and they give you this really sweet drink that's fizzy to drink. And then like you walk out in another really big area, and then you're in America. And so, yeah. And I was just kind of putting 2 and 2 together. I remember going through registration, having my all my like vaccines and stuff, shots. And I was like, why are they poking us? What's going on? Yeah, I still remember bits and pieces of that. Yeah.
I would say so. And so you said your parents met in the refugee camp.
Yeah.
And they were there for 10 years?
Yeah. So my dad had, and I just recently found this out. My dad had an opportunity to leave the refugee camp, and he was actually, my mom was just pregnant with me, and I had my older brother, and it was just just them, my older brother, Peter, and then, I was still in my mom's belly. But there's like a picture, and I'm like, oh, look, like, wait. And I was confused because it was a registration picture. And I'm like, why? What's going on here? And my mom was like, yeah, your dad, we were actually going to leave early. We were going to leave in like 83 or something like that. But your father didn't want to leave. And I'm like, oh, I could have been born in America. It's like so close. No. But yeah, so I just found that out, like, and my dad fought in the war, and when I say the war, a lot of people kind of look at me funny. I'm like, and especially my white friends, and I'm like, we were on your side, dude. We were on your side. It's like, they're like, I have an uncle who went to Nam. I'm like, we were on your side, bro.
It's where it's just weather, huh? It's kind of cold out.
Yeah. But one of the really crazy things is, my dad was like 12, 13. CIA and then American government, CIA came in with, the government, and they said, basically said to the Hmong people, hey, they met with their leaders and said, hey, we want you guys to fight for us, and win, lose, or draw, you'll have free citizenship to America. Every man who fights, their family can go to America. And so here are these hill people that live in the hills of Laos, in the mountains of Laos, and this offer is great. And by the way, per month we'll pay you like, $75 a
Your
month.
dad was 12 or 13?
12, yeah. All his brothers, they opt up, and so all his younger brothers didn't, but him and some of his old brothers, they went and they fought. And it was, the Hmong people were already disenfranchised people that were considered, we were the mountain people. The word is Mung Pachoa, which literally means the hill tribe people, or so that's why the word hill tribe to us means something. That's why we named our parent company Hill Tribe LLC.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's, yeah. You'll see that word a lot, with like Hmong products, Hill Tribe. But it's just this idea of where the reason why a lot of the Hmong people lived in the hills was because they were forbidden to live in the lowlands where it was fertile, because they were considered like second-class citizens. So the Hmong people lived in the hills, and living in the hills, in the mountains, they learned how to farm. They learned how to do irrigation. They learned how to do all these things, and they kept still going. And that's what I love. Like, I love telling young Hmong kids, I'm like, man, our grandparents wasn't given any opportunity. They weren't supposed to make it. They were given the crappiest farming land, but we still found a way. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they still found a way.
Yeah.
And I love telling young Hmong kids, like, that blood that pumped through their veins and pumped through their hearts is the same blood that pumps in your vein and your heart. So you are without excuse. So then when you to the young Hmong kids, it's like, if you feel unmotivated, get to know their story, because that's going to motivate you. Because when you realize the sacrifices, you realize what they did so that they can, not for their freedom, but for your freedom, it changes you. And I tell people, my dad, I didn't find out this till later in life. I was, probably a couple years ago, and my dad was a huge hero in the war. In our culture, what happens is especially when you're a kid, especially you're a boy, if they're like parties and gatherings, any of the older gentlemen can stop you and say, "Hey, son, what's your name?" And what you do is you tell them your name, and you tell them who your dad is and who his dad is. Kind of joking, saying it's almost like Game of Thrones style, like son, like Rathia, son of blah blah blah, son of blah blah blah. We just do that, and just not as exciting, but we do that. And I remember when I was a kid, running around, and this group of Hmong, this party, and it was in the living room, and I think me and a bunch of kids like running through the living room, and I was always a bigger kid, so I always stood out, and then all the other Hmong kids, and I remember this gentleman stopped me and said, "Hey son, what's your name?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm Yia," and I told my dad's name and my dad's name, and the room got quiet, and he looked at me and he said, "Son, your dad saved my life in the war. And a lot of us men wouldn't be here if it wasn't for what he did." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. Can I go play now?" You're a stupid kid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I I remember that. And I still remember today, like when we go to parties or if there's gatherings and big parties, like men will surround him and listen to his stories. And, and I realized what really triggered inside of me is when I was a kid, I was always very embarrassed of my mom and dad. And it's, and just the fact that they couldn't speak English, especially when you had a career day. It's like, I remember this career day, this kid, his dad was a, airline pilot, and he brought in his like headset and his mask, and his big air mask, and he came in and told everyone, and all the, especially like all the boys were like, what the heck, this is so awesome. Or my buddy, one of my friends growing up, his dad was a fireman, so he brought in the whole getup, brought in the truck. And I always felt embarrassed because they're like, well, what does your dad do? And I'm like, I don't know. I think, he was a carpenter at the time. He built kitchen cabinets. And I said, no, he works, he just builds kitchens, but he couldn't speak English. So I felt a little embarrassed, when friends were like, hey, can we come over to your house? I'm like, no, because I just didn't want them to see that. Or, it's not like these kids are mean, but it's just they don't understand. Well, how come your parents don't speak English, Yeah. Even until college, I think, I talked to some of my friends and they're like, wait, your parents don't speak English? Like, how do they get around? I'm like, I used to be so embarrassed with that question. Like, how do they get around? But now I wear that as a badge of honor. I'm like, yeah, that's, what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it's amazing how they can still get around without speaking English.
Well, it goes back to the farming in the mountains that you make with what you have.
Exactly.
And you're still able to make it work. And that does seem to be a distinctly American feature is like, if you don't speak English, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Whereas the way I look at it is it's amazing how many places in the world where they speak multiple languages.
Yeah.
And then the U.S. is like, no.
You speak American.
Yeah, American is the language. You all need to learn it, even though we're a country of 300 million in a world of 7+ billion.
Yeah, and even a lot around the country, it's like everybody kind of knows a little bit of English. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that it's like because I think that there's a standard as if you know English or wherever you are, like you could be in the Congo or whatever, like they'll know a little bit of English because they know that if Americans come through, like, we can communicate with them. So there's like this standard, and I totally get where you're coming from, but I also know that there's this standard for English where it's like, while people are saying, I believe that English is almost this kind of universal language where everybody kind of knows a little bit of it, just so that if we ever, we can just use that to communicate with each other. But one of the things that I really realized, as growing up, with my parents is there's just a lot of shame where it's like, oh, I don't want to like try to explain to all my friends like who I am, where I'm from. And so that led to like in college, just this kind of running from who I was. So, one of the things that I really learned is, where a lot of friends would say to me is like, man, you're so American. Like sometimes I forget that you're Hmong, right? Especially in college, a lot of friends said that to me. And what I never got a chance to say to them and what I really wanted to say was, bro, you don't understand. Like I had to adapt. Yeah. Like I had to adapt to your ways, because nobody was gonna try to understand like Hmong culture from what I'm saying, like my buddies in college, my white friends in college wasn't going to understand Hmong culture unless it was like my Hmong friends. So it's like I had to adapt. So like growing up, like I had to adapt. So, I as a kid I was always afraid of being made fun of and laugh. So to adapt to that I became like, I try to get like witty, like have fast comebacks.
Yeah.
If I can make people laugh, then they won't laugh, at me, they'll laugh with me kind of mentality. And I think that really pushed me like in the survival mode of like, you have to adapt, you have to talk like them, you have to engage in what they're engaging in. Like I literally watched Seinfeld. Excuse me. I grew up watching, I forced myself to watch Seinfeld so that I have context to talk to, because like all my buddies watch Seinfeld, like I got into movies because everybody would talk about movies because I had to know the context.
And when did it begin to shift for you? Because it's somewhat surprising to hear from Chef Yia Vang literally like one of the most notable Hmong chefs in Minnesota for sure, but even on a national level.
Thank you, man.
It's surprising to hear this. You would assume someone like yourself has just always been in the front saying, this is Hmong culture. Yeah. When did that shift from feeling you needed to hide it or that it was a point of shame to now being where you are?
Yeah. So for me, the shift came after I did a bunch of cooking stint at all these different restaurants and Italian restaurants, like barbecue smoke pit restaurants, French restaurants, like classic Americana restaurants, which is super funny too, because right now, like I'll make burgers or even like meatballs and people are like, well, you know how to do that? And I'm like, yeah, do you know what I'm saying? It's like I grew up in the restaurant world, dude. Like,
that's not your brand.
Yeah, right. It's like there's this idea where it's like, oh, you can only cook your brand. If it's not rice, if it's not some kind of noodles. I'm like, yeah, I get it, man. I get it. So one of the things that I really like push hard on was to learn all these skills, different things, because I never wanted to do quote unquote Asian food because I'm like, that's the stereotype. So anyways, I worked at all these restaurants. They're great, but I would always feel there was a sense of something missing. And then what would really drive me was when I went back to my mom's, when I would go back to my mom's table and eat her food. And it was just simple food, man. And simple Hmong food. And there would be this there's revival in my soul. And I felt awoken. I woken up. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? English is my second language, bro. So,
all the above.
Yeah, all the above. I've woken into up. I did. But eventually what happened there was, the philosophy for Union Hmong Kitchen was, at that time we would just call ourselves Union Kitchen because I didn't even want people to know that we were Hmong. Because I was afraid that if we were going to be Hmong, nobody would come up.
So even in starting a Hmong restaurant, we didn't
even call it a Hmong restaurant. We just called it a restaurant.
So it's almost still like we kind of have to not let people even know what's up and have them taste it first before we can really.
Yeah. Because I think that, I see this today too. Like exactly, I think it fits what's going on today is people don't want to get to know people. They label them first. So then when they come in, they feel like they have control of the situation, right? So, like, for example, like you and I, we just meet. First of all, I'm going to be like, I'm going to be like, oh, who does he vote for? Mm-hmm. Oh, what side of the right or left is he at? What's his ideology? Religion-wise, where is he? Socioeconomic-wise. And I think that a lot of times, I think the research and graph, that stuff's good, but we get so into that you forget that there's a human soul on the other end. And then in that human soul, there are experiences that happen to them so that it brings them to make some of the decisions and choices that they make. And it's hard to do that when you meet someone for 5 seconds and right away you look at them and you're like, okay, so he's got this like Trump 2020 sticker on. So, he's probably racist, blah, 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 blah. And again,
You're not referring to me right now, by the way.
No, I'm not.
I just want to make that clear.
But you know what I'm saying? For example.
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
And again, like, I'm apolitical, man.
No,
I'm apolitical. So when I see that right now, or like, hey, he has a Biden sticker. Oh, he's blah, 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 blah. Or
he must believe these 20 things, and it has to be that way.
Yeah,
and it's like binary processing of things that are not binary.
And because I think people are afraid to get to know people.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, like, if you got to know this person and you loved hanging out with them and you just thought they were the greatest, but then later on you found out that, they vote this certain way, does it still change the fact that you had this really great connection with this person? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Or do you go back and discriminate and throw that all away and be like, blah, whatever. Like, oh, no, he's a horrible person. Because there's a certain group of people on whatever side that are the loud voices, you know what I'm saying, that are saying these things, that are doing these things, but they don't represent the whole group.
The overload of information, especially everybody that's on every social media app, the overload of information you get, it's almost become a necessity as especially a younger person. In order to process information, you have to create these hyper efficient systems, but it got past the point of being real. And so people are now starting to brand themselves a certain way. It's either you're right or you're left, you're blue or you're red. And to me, it's like, honestly, at this point, I think, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but at this point, if you ask most people, do you think these are the best people to run this country? Most people would probably say no, but I have to pick one. It's like, oh no. So the system that's in place, it's making us have to be binary, choose one or two, and then you have to align with every single thing. And I struggle with this personally, that I'm all over the board about stuff. I'm very apolitical myself because of that. It's like the system itself is not right. But unfortunately, it's like, obviously that's the most divisive thing. But what you're saying is totally true, that when you meet someone, it's almost like an arrogance thing, that you're like, oh no, I'm really good with people. I know what they're all about, even though I have just met them. But something I read that has really impacted the way I think about it, and it's led me to really try to get to know someone before judging what they're about, is that generally what you see in someone is a reflection of something that's happened to you. So if I look at someone and immediately make judgments, there are these subconscious things going on that if you're not recognizing those are happening, that you look at them, you go, they're like that, I'm not going to think any otherwise. When in reality, that's your reflection of who they are. And then you try everything they do to fit that. And it's like, unfortunately, it's almost like that's how it started. And then social media came along, and now people feel like they should fit how they look. And you see people changing how they dress or what they, I mean, you literally just said it. People going to farmers markets and trying to do farm stuff for Instagram likes. And I have had that thought, is how many things are popular that people are doing that they don't like doing it. Just because it's like really photographic. And I think it's a big problem.
Yeah. I think that because of social media and because of platforms like Instagram, Facebook, whatever, all the kids are using these days, TikTok, whatever, because of that, everybody is their own PR manager. And it's about public relations. Literally, that's what it is. It's how do I create myself to look a certain way that people think a certain way about me? So everyone thinks that they're their own PR group or whatever, manager. Yeah. And so that's why the sun has to be perfect as I put my hands on my hips and my cup in this hand. And, hey, they got to know that my cup of coffee is, like fair trade, blah, blah, blah,
Brand
blah.
out, baby.
Yeah. And then on this other hand, it's like I'm eating this, organic, whatever scone, and I'm out here supporting local farms. I'm doing that. And there are some genuine people who are doing that, and that's awesome. Like, I'm not knocking
them. And that's where it starts.
Yeah, it started from there, and then it's like, oh, wow, these people are getting attention. So it's all about just getting attention. And I guess I'm bringing this all back to kind of me figuring this out of where I belong is I'm cooking at all these fancy restaurants, and they're amazing. Don't get me wrong. And the staff there are awesome. The chefs there are great. And I just felt like there was just something missing in my soul. I felt like there was something missing. What I would do as a young cook was I always just emulated all these fancy chefs I knew, because that's what was fancy, and that's what, was getting attention. So even like getting all these, like the perfect spoons, all the right spoons for plating, getting all the tweezers, I did all that. Getting all the really cool gadgets, the instant, like the sous vide machines and this and that. And doing all these trends, like I was doing it, but it was so soulless. It's like taking a 5-hour energy drink, pounding that down, going hard for 5 hours, and then crashing for 10. And that's just how my soul felt. Like, it wasn't until like I said, I get back to my mom's table. I'm eating the food from her table, and I'm realizing that, man, why does my soul come so alive when she puts, when she starts a pot of soup with pork bones and lemongrass and ginger, Mung mustard greens, and we eat that over rice. It's, first of all, it ain't sexy. It's not going to get that many Instagram likes on it if I took a picture, even if I did the contrast right and, heighten up all the saturation.
Even with high contrast?
Yeah, even with high contrast. Yeah. I know that it's not going to get that. It kind of looks pretty blah, As I think about it, I'm like, wow, this is the stuff I love. This is the stuff that, like, when I come over to my mom and dad's house, like, the other day I was there, my mom's like, hey, we have braised pig's feet. I'm like, I'm down, and then I was just like, you know what? Screw it. Like, even then I was still hesitant, right? So you're right. So it was still Union Kitchen. There's no Hmong in there, because I didn't want people to be like, Hmong food? I don't know what that is, So there was no Hmong in there. So it's just Union Kitchen. And it wasn't until a friend of mine who really challenged me on that and says, you can't be unapologetic about what you bake. Like, let them come to you. The whole Field of Dreams idea. If you build it, they will come. Let them come to you, because people are bored with, all these other stuff, all the stuff that we've been kind of trend stuff. And then a friend of mine also just kind of helped me with some of the wording of everything. And so we just came up with, he came up, we were talking through and I just said, you know what? It seems like food is about a narrative. So we kind of just coined this phrase that every dish has a narrative. You follow that narrative long enough and close enough, you get to the people behind the food. And once you're there, it's not about the food. It's actually about people. That food is a catalyst into cultivating great relationships. And we use the word catalyst and cultivating. And I intentionally use those words because it's a catalyst. Like, what does a catalyst do? It starts a reaction. And cultivating a relationship is cultivated. It's not like, oh yeah, we're buddies, right? We're cool, great.
Did we just become best friends?
Yeah, dude. But that cultivation, it's like almost it's farming, right? Cultivating something.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes care. Like a field that's not cultivated and not taken care of and it's not tended, it doesn't grow. But if you want relationships to grow, you got to take time and to care. What's the best way of doing it? Gathering around food. Even old friends after not seeing a while, like go grab a drink, like just grab a burger together, and again, it doesn't take that much.
Yeah.
And that relationship gets cultivated. That's
beautiful, man. And it's so true. It's like, especially when you get older and you get so busy, I have found the people that I end up hanging out with more with where it's like, I want to grab a burger. Who's my burger person again? Even just having like Chef Stefan a couple weeks ago, I'm like, yo, I was texting her yesterday. Like, when are we doing this charcuterie though?
Yeah.
It's a very deeply personal thing, and it's funny because this is just how my brain works. Like the marketing side is like, so how can something like a Hmong kitchen in a population of people that outside of the Hmong people probably know little to nothing about it work, and how did you develop such? And this is going to be me speculating here. How did you develop such a hardcore fan base so quickly? And there's this interesting marketing concept, and you see a lot of people doing it. It's sometimes labeled as like shock marketing. Okay. But what you do is you take the thing you're known for most and you do an extreme version of that. And people are either going to love that.
Stunt burgers. Yeah. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Stunt burgers?
No, what's that?
A stunt burger is like, instead of just like, it's like, how crazy can we build a burger?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we put pork belly on there and pulled pork and another slab of bacon and a smoked brisket on top of, and we call that like the barbecue master burger, Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like shock value.
Yeah. And so you take what you're known for and you do it to an extreme.
Yeah.
And you'll find some people will be like, this is too much for me. I'm out. But guess what? Those people aren't. Those are the people who just like your stuff. And if you are a little bit too much this, I'm out. But then you'll find that the people who see you doing it to the full extent, I'm doing Hmong food to the best of my ability, to as Hmong as I can make this kitchen, you're going to find way more. That these people are going to be with you every step of the way. And it's similar in coffee that there's a lot of like in business, there's a lot of concessions you have to make. They're like, oh, okay, we have to do this, we have to do that. But at some point you have to say, no, I'm not going to buy cheaper coffee to be able to price compete with Starbucks, because then we're just another coffee. We want to create coffees that, yes, they're admittedly expensive for a 12-ounce bag of coffee, but the flavor in them. When I do a sampling at Lund's, back when COVID wasn't a thing, I'm telling you, half the people I give the coffee to will straight up tell, and this is a weird thing about being behind a table, is people will tell you exactly what they're thinking. They'll be like, this is weird. This is not from this. No.
Yeah.
But then the other half will be like, I've not had a coffee like this. Yeah. And that person, I've always said that the people will tell people about things they love and about things they hate. I will not tell you about something in the middle. I will not tell you, oh, dude, I had the okayest burger last week. Yeah. If you're really hungry and you happen to be right there, you should. It's like, I love it or hate it. But even if someone told me I hated that burger, I'd be still kind of curious to try it. Be like, oh, okay, well, I still want to try it. And so in doing that, I think even though it's a huge risk and it's very nerve-wracking to do something that no one is doing, but I think strategically when you think about it, it's a very good decision. But that I'm looking at it from a very simple, like, the afterwards analysis, hindsight 2020, where at the time, I can't. Is that when the shift happened for you?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is in the Hmong world, in the Hmong culture, the Hmong, group, world, whatever, we still can't agree on what is Hmong food ourselves.
I was literally just about to ask, like, here's my stupid blanket question. Like, what is Hmong food?
So we still can't argue. Everyone's got their own opinion on it. It's, and it's like, dude, I'm not going to get into that conversation because I'm like, it's not worth my time. And not because I'm too good for it or that's not my attitude. It's just like, we're going to talk in circles. Are you Lord of the Ring fans?
Yeah.
Okay. So remember when Merry and Pippin went and there was like all the old trees, they were like discussing, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We're going to nerd out a little bit.
I'm excited to see where this is going.
Okay. So you know how like they're like, cause like they're like, hey, war's happening, like battle's happening, right? And the old tree guard or whatever those guys are, were like, they're like, oh, okay. And they're like, da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
And Merry and Pippin, right? There's the two, or is that one person? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
I know who you're talking about.
The two little hobbits were like, come on, we gotta go, like, we gotta go to, we gotta go. And he goes, and the tree that they're sitting on is like, he turns around, he's like, we're just like he's something along the lines, like, we're just discussing if we should discuss this yet, and they're like, wait, what? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the whole idea was like, just having a discussion of agreeing of, okay, can we have this discussion? That's how it is with Hmong people when it comes to Hmong food. It's like they argue about, should we argue about this? And then they'll have the argument about it or the discussion or whatever. And so I'm just like, I just don't have time for this. So one of the things as I think about Hmong food, I'm like, what's the best way to explain Hmong food? And I tell people that Hmong food isn't a type of food. It's a philosophy of food. It's a way of thinking about food. And what I mean with that is, Hmong food has always been this, if you want to talk about as a type of food, we're always we're in this process of growth, of always growing. And the reason we are doing that is because our people, no matter where we went, we glean from all these different cultures that we're around. Because we're traveling people. We move around. We rub shoulders with other cultures. To be able to survive with other cultures and other heritages around you and other groups around you, you have to be able to work with them. And you have to have this symbiotic relationship.
And I have to imagine even just hearing your dad's, I don't even know what to call it, where you just walk up and can get stuff that your geographical location because you're creating relationships with farmers, that I have to imagine not only being around the people and how they prepare their food, but just what's available has to change dramatically depending on where you are.
So before, all these restaurants are like, oh, we have a rotating menu, da-da-da-da. It's like, yeah, we do that all the time. You just eat what you have. There wasn't a choice. There wasn't like, oh, mom, when you go to the store, can you get this and this and this? It's like, nah, man, you don't make requests to your mom and dad. Who's making the food for you? As kids, you take what they give you. And that's always been the attitude. And so that's the same philosophy with Hmong food, no matter where we are. And we'll find a way. That's like, it's been like this Hmong philosophy. We'll find a way. You work the problem, you move to the next. Work the problem, move to the next. So find a way. And it's again, like I said, when I speak to young Hmong kids, like when we do, like when I go to schools and speak to them and stuff, I always talk about that. I talk about the idea that there's this generation of Hmong, our grandparents and parents. They always found a way. So when you want to quit, you have to ask yourself, are you going to find a way for the next generation? And that's what I think about when I think about our food. Like, for example, like we still use flavors that we're familiar with, like I tell people, it's like a painting, right? And I always use this example, and I say, Hmong food is like, Hmong flavors are like the canvas. It's the consistent. It's the base. It's always the same. But the paint that we use is going to change. What kind of paint, what kind of color. So for example, like here in the north, we have great access to a lot of root vegetables. Let's play with that. Let's use our flavor base that we know. Let's these very herbal / very like pungent flavors. And I guess use the word pungent, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah, just these strong quote unquote umami flavors. Aromatic flavors. And we need to use that, but then instead of using it on vegetables and that are native to Laos and Thailand, we're going to use it to the north. So what's here? So we got our rutabaga, we got our kohlrabi, we got different kinds of turnips, radishes, and then when you do that, you actually use a language. Food is a universal language, right? So then when we have guests that come in and eat and they're going, hey, this is rutabaga, but I've never tasted rutabaga that way before. We're still using that language that they understand. Like rutabaga, turnip, whatever, cabbage. But we're gonna use but that canvas it still remains the same. And that's what I believe in Hmong food. For example, like we have my mom and dad, they love, hunting small game. They used to anyways, and they're a little older now. But there was this like squirrel stew that every Hmong kid eats growing up. We love it. I love it. It's awesome. You can't get farm squirrels, and looked everywhere. So we can't sell it. But it's a squirrel stew, and I love it. It's delicious. It's like if I ate it, I'm like, it's a squirrel. It's awesome. And people might think that's weird, but it's like, dude, you got to do what you got to do, right? So growing up, it wasn't like they went squirrel hunting for the sake of squirrel hunting. It was actually, I jokingly told some of my friends, I lived Oregon Trail. It's like, you know what I'm talking about? Oregon Trail, when you go, you're hunting and you maybe get 3 squirrels, but then that kind of gets you to the next thing. Sometimes that's what we did, Yeah. So, but I'm like, what's the closest to squirrel we can get that's, along those lines? So we're like rabbit. Mm-hmm. So it's like doing that dish with rabbit, but, originated from squirrel. And what's really delicious about that dish is the stew itself is a little thicker. Mm-hmm. So what you end up doing is you get sticky rice, and that sticky rice, for the broth or whatever you want to say, like the sauce for it, it's a little thicker. Yeah. So you just dip it in that, and it's amazing. And it's delicious.
I will tell you that. Well, first of all, you should probably tell the squirrel story after they've tried it and it's delicious. But here's the thing: is hearing you talk about food. Mm-hmm. Basically, I'm at the point where it's like, if you're making it, I'm in. And I went to the Vinai pop up a couple of weeks ago, and duck heart's on the menu. Mm-hmm. I've never had it, but I go, you know what? I've always liked the philosophy of using the animal from head to toe, just from there's the environmental standpoint, all the food waste that's happening, but you go, this is really how it should be. And also, the side tangent here, I went in this weird rabbit hole about organ meat. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of the carnivore diet?
Yeah, that's just like
you literally only eat meat. And I go, there's no way you could physically do that. Apparently, the way you can do it, and the reason so many people are not able to do it, is because we don't eat organ meat. Yeah, and organ meat
has a lot of minerals.
And these are actually the most like health beneficial meats out there. Mm-hmm. So that thought popped in my head. But honestly, at the root of it, I goes, you know what? After this conversation with you and like learning about that, and I was like, duck heart, I didn't even think twice because of that. And also, it's funny with squirrel that. Part of the reason it's weird in the U.S. is this wasn't always the way that, like in the 1800s in the bayou down south, it was a huge thing. Yeah. And it actually, hunting squirrels became illegal because so many people were doing it that they almost went extinct. And then because it became illegal, it became like
shunned.
And then the shun taboo. Turns to like, oh, this is just weird now.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, people, don't eat city squirrels. Those are weird. Like, that's gross. Like, they go through trash and, like... They're rodents, like city squirrel. But when we do eat squirrel, and when I say squirrel, people are like, oh, like off the street, you guys just like take one off from the backyard. And I'm like, no, like we go out to like, there's like hunting lands and farms. And, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like these are country squirrels. Like they get real. I was talking to one of my buddy who's a food writer, Steve Hoffman, and I'm like, man, it's all about the thighs, dude. You look at these guys sitting down, they're squatting down to eat eat that acorn or whatever. I'm a thigh dude, like you just see that hind quarter just real, like they're fattening up for the winter. It's like, it's go time. Get the shotguns. It's go time.
I will be completely honest with you. This is the first time I've ever had someone describe a squirrel to me and I go, what? That does kind of good right now. It's a little chilly outside and I stew with a sticky rice.
Bro, it's, I tell people if like my parents, like, they would always, when they go out or their friends will go and get a few of them, like they're good. You can also tell the old ones from the young ones. It sounds so bad, but you can totally tell because the young ones are more tender. They're just more, they're easier. The young ones a little tougher. You got to braise it a little longer. Yeah. Anyway, squirrels, but we did that with rabbit. And using like rabbit, and we have, we have some purveyors that have rabbit farms and stuff like that.
How long did it take from launching? Because Union Kitchen, You launched as Union Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
How long until after that you added Mung into it?
Probably a year and a half.
And did that change how people viewed it if it was their first time?
At that time, I think everyone knew that it was Union, and everyone kind of knew by that time that it was like Hmong food. But what was really weird was like there's Union everything around Union Station, Union Depot, Union Rooftop. So everyone just kept associating us with them, like or Union Gospel Mission even. Yeah. So we just got. So I'm like, look, we have to just made a little distinction. So Union Hmong Kitchen, so then that it's a Hmong kitchen that and then it's just that idea. I mean, we're still doing pop up at that time, So as we're doing pop ups, we're getting more consistent pop ups. We just said, hey, what is? I always say, how do you define a kitchen? And I was like, define a kitchen. It's not by walls. It's not by equipment. A kitchen is any area where food is made, people are served, and hospitality reigns overall. And so we could literally, a tailgating party could be a kitchen, if you really want to call that.
Is my apartment still a kitchen even though my oven is like 2 feet wide?
Completely. You can't, it's like home is never really a building.
Yeah.
Home is where the heart is, kind of deal. And I think that's kind of that philosophy that we came where it's like no matter where we're going to be placed. So for example, we did this wedding up in it was like an hour away from the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. And it was on the lake. It was beautiful. There was no kitchen. So we filled up a Sprinter van, drove up there, and we built our own kitchen in the woods. And it was just it was frustrating, but I loved it. It was so challenging. Rolling spring rolls.
And MacGyver style.
Yeah, Mungivering style. Yeah. so that's another joke I always say, my dad, he's a tinker, so he went tinkers with stuff as a kid where I was like, Mom, what's Dad doing? Mom, your dad's MacGyvering out there, like Richard Dean Anderson, MacGyver. And so we just jokingly switched to Mungivering. We have the when we get into a situation, it's kind of hard. We're going to Munggiver this, bros.
Well, that's the vibe I got even at the pop-up a couple weeks ago. Cinder blocks, great.
Boom. Yeah.
Done.
Wood. Yeah. And so, that grill, you saw that great grill, that little grill we saw, we took that up there and we cooked for 230 people. Yeah. It's just in the middle of the woods.
Here's a side question. You can opt not to answer this or not. No. When working with the city or the state, is it hard to be able to get things like that approved for a pop-up or anything like that?
Man, you gotta say no English. That's good. So
that's where I messed up.
Yeah, dude. You just be like, you can just be like, oh, you're trying to be German or something.
Yeah.
Russian. You're like, da.
No, this is coffee machine.
Niet. Just say niet, da. No. One of the things that we have been able to do is have just a great relationship with the health department and just being like, hey man, what are the rules? What are the bare minimums that do we need? And what do we need that would make this safe for everyone?
Yeah.
So, so we're always really open dialogue with them.
Yeah.
And they always set out a set of rules,
Yeah. And it's like these rules are put in place for very good reasons.
Yeah, definitely.
But you do look at some of the rules and be like, yes, I understand why this rule is in place, but we're doing it a little differently. And this is happening right now because we have this mobile coffee unit. It's the same thing. So I was curious about that. What point... How do I phrase it? What point did things pop off? Because you go from pop-ups, you open a semi-permanent. Is that fair to call Union?
Yeah, residency. Yeah,
a residency at Sociable Ciderworks with Union, later to become Union Hmong Kitchen.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, it's like I knew your name before meeting you, and I was like, I don't know why. Well, it's because I love food, and your name was just everywhere for a minute or for a while, and then I was like, oh, and. Sometimes I don't think of it as that's a cool dude cooking, and people caught on to it. Did you feel that in a specific moment, or was it just momentum?
No, I think the most for me, I really didn't pay attention to that. For me, it was getting the story of my mom and dad out, hands down. I didn't give a crap about anything else. Life was pretty simple. So what really happened was my dad had a really bad work accident. I don't know, it's probably 5 years ago. And he fell. He fell off a stair. He works he builds homes, puts in installations. That's what he does. I think he was working on this deck, and their work group was working on this deck, and he fell off the stair, fell back, and he fractured his back of his skull on a railing, and and it was pretty rough. And so he went to he was in the ICU for 6 weeks. He had to learn how to rehab a little bit, and at the time he They were afraid that he was going to have a stroke because there was like blood that was leaking in his brain, but then they had to like, so it was like damn you don't kind of situation. And so he was in the ICU, and I remember, they were living in Wisconsin at this point, so it was in Marshfield Hospital, which is like one of the big hospitals in Wisconsin, and so it's like 3-ish hours from here. So I drove down for a weekend when it happened, and my sister, my siblings from out of state, they all flew in, and I think my mom was pretty wrecked because they've been together for a while, so she just doesn't know how to do life without him, and so she was pretty wrecked. We had family come in and everything, and so my dad, in our church, he was an elder in the church. He was a pretty big part of our community back at home. So like everybody was kind of like, everyone just stopped everything and just went. And Hmong people, when someone is hurting like that, what we do is literally everybody just comes and we take over the waiting room. It's just what we do. And I have people in the medical world, they're like, yeah, like the Hmong people, they just all like just gather, and it's like they just don't leave. I'm like, yeah, that's what we do. That's how you support people. Like you're there, you show up. You don't just call them. You don't text them. Oh, we're our thoughts, sending out good vibes. We don't do that.
T's and P's.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like we actually, like they show up. If it means it's a 4-hour drive, my parents still do it. So when I got there, I was like one of the last ones there, and I didn't really want to see him because not like I didn't want to see him, but it's just like I didn't know how I was going to control him. And at this point, things were kind of starting to roll with Union Kitchen, or Union Hmong Kitchen. It was starting to roll, and it was all about, like, a lot of people were like, yeah, how does it feel to be the voice of the Hmong people, of the Hmong food, and how, and a lot of people were just saying, like, this is so cool, like, you're the guy that's going to speak for our people, blah, 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 and, I didn't want that burden. Like, at that point, my cousin Chris and I kind of, like, started this together, and I'm just like, Chris, man, I don't want that. He goes, on me too, dude. Hmong people are super critical of everything, and so I remember I go in, and it's in the ICU, it's on a weekend, so, like, the whole place, like, the lights were off, and ICU is already a little freaky already. So I go in, and for the first time in my life, I see my dad laying up on the bed, and he they had to keep him sedated. So he had there was this big wrap around his head, and they weren't sure what to do yet, and his brain was was swollen, and he could kind of barely remember, barely talk. But the doctor said, hey, if you go in there, just ask him if he knows you. Don't try to overstimulate them, but like just make sure if he's like still what his memory is, and if he still remembers you. And so my dad's my hero, right? He's fought a war. He's done all these things. He's a hero to many people. People respect him. He's one of those men who, when he speaks, people listen to him, especially in our community. And so I ended up walking in, and I looked at him, and he was just like kind of groggly. And I'd never seen him that weak before. I never seen him that hurt before. The worst I've ever seen my dad before was he like cut his finger at his workshop once, and he had a bandage on his thumb. Like that's the worst I've ever seen my dad. Even when he's sick, he's still like working for us. Even when he's got a fever, when he's not feeling well, he's still like pumping away. And I remember I looked at him and I said, hey, Dad, do you know who I am? And he kind of looks at me, and he kind of like rolls his eye a little bit. He's kind of back and forth, and he just says, I think you're my son. You're my son. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, do you know my name? And he just kept saying, you're my son, or something like that. And I left. So we were driving back to the city. I had to work. So we were driving back to the city, and I was just kind of like zoning out. And I just thought to myself, frick, if he dies, because like the doctor was like, we're not sure, like head injuries, like it could be great one day and then boom, turns out the next day. So the doctor was giving us reality, which I'm like, I appreciate that. So I was like, if he dies in Marshfield, Wisconsin this weekend, like he won't get to see his legacy. And I think that sometimes when we think of the word legacy, we actually think about, oh, after they're gone, then we'll talk about them. But how great would it be if we talk about them and celebrate them when they're still here? And that day changed. I think it changed the trajectory of Union Hmong Kitchen. That is the day that it changed the trajectory of where we are going with Vinai. And it changed, if you want to call it, quote unquote, our brand, whatever you want to call it. It changed all of that. Because then it didn't become about, oh yeah, how do you write your story so then you're part of the culinary narrative in Twin Cities? I don't give a schniz about that anymore. What I did care about is how do I tell their story and honor them and make sure that they see that their legacy will live on while they're living, and one day when they pass, they can go in peace knowing that, hey, like the kids are okay, like we raised good kids, And so it changed me, man. Like it changed me. And then even the way I cook, like why am I so adamant on cooking over wood fire? Not because it's sexy and it's cool and like everyone's doing it. And why am I so adamant that when my boys cook over wood fire, they get it right? Because that's what my dad taught me. That is ingrained inside of me. Why am I so adamant about how we, do our food and how we handle hospitality and how we treat people when they come in? Because my mom and dad, our home was always a home where people can come and rest. People can come and take a break. Like, in our church, like when missionaries came home, when we had new pastors that come in, my parents would always open our house and say, "Hey, come rest here. We'll take care of you." Even when they go out and they, like for example, if like there was a Sunday or a Saturday we go out, we butcher a whole pig. My mom and dad would save a certain part of that, or the best cuts of meat, and bring it over to one of the missionaries' house or one of the pastor's house, and say, "Hey, like we're going to take care of you," and I want to take all of that and put it into Vinai, and we are doing that. We're seeing pieces of that in Vinai. I tell people I love movies. Right? I love watching movies. We were kind of dorking out about a movie, and in the movie Batman Begins, the Christopher Nolan one, there's a part where Bruce Wayne comes back and he's on the plane with Alfred, and Alfred goes, "What are you going to do?" And Bruce Wayne is like, we have to fight evil. Like we have to fight evil in Gotham. And he's like, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And he's like, he goes, and he's just like, Bruce Wayne is just a man. But if I give him a symbol, if I created a symbol that, that put fear in them, like evil will know, darkness will know that, that this symbol stands for, truth and justice and peace. And as I think about that, I'm like, I think about that scene and I'm like, that's so incredible because, if you think about from the view of Batman, like he's a symbol. Anybody can wear the cape and cowl. As long as they're standing for that symbol of Batman, like people, like, bad guys will always fear Batman, regardless of who wears that cape and cowl, boy, girl, doesn't matter, and I think of Vinai as a symbol, like regardless of who's cooking in the back, regardless of what ethnicity is the team that's cooking, what we stand for is, when we think about comfort, we think about peace, we think about caring for people. Like that's what we stand for. It's that symbol that when people see that V, that what they're actually seeing is my mom and dad's legacy. And so it might not be the vegetables that they work with. It might not be the meat that my dad taught me how to grow with originally, because all that stuff can change, right? Time changes all that stuff, and we got to be open for change. But it's at the core of it. It's about taking care of people in their time of need. So even if it's a wealthy person or family from Wayzata that's coming in, or just a regular blue collar dude from St. Paul come in, I don't care who you are. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care where your ideology is. As long as you leave all the crazy at the door and you can come and you want to come in, by coming in and you treat everyone in there with dignity and respect, we will treat you with dignity and respect. And just that whole idea of like, oh, you make sure you treat people first, then we'll treat you. It's like a conditional thing. Yeah. But what if we unconditionally love people? What if we say, regardless of wherever your history is or whatever your background is, you come in here and you get a blank slate and we treat you with dignity and respect. And hopefully by being a part of, the Vang family here, traditions, that Vang family hospitality, hopefully that changes a little bit of them. So when they leave and they go to their neighborhood, they were so affected and infected by us that while they're home, they knock on their neighbor's door and said, "Hey, come join us for dinner." Not because, whatever, we're trying to be cool and trendy or whatever, but come join us for dinner because we had an awesome experience at Vinai. We were treated so well that we can't just keep this inside of ourselves, that we need to share this. And so it's really not even about, let's get a lot of people here. No, it's like we want the people here, but we want to do our best to make sure your experience is great and then that you're treated and cared for.
I think when motivation changes from internal to external, I think it also changes the definition of success, that when you're sitting there being like, well, how would it be branded if I put it as
Yeah.
Mung? How would it be perceived? Should we have it? And it's like, that's like a very internal kind of like, oh, this is a business decision. I want to succeed in business. And this is something I struggle with too, is, when motivation becomes about others, this is something that shifted business for me. Is I realized the best part about having a business is I can positively change other people's life. And ironically, it's turned me into a stress monster that's all I want to do now. But that's a beautiful kind of lesson to take, that when it shifted to not even just being about what you're doing, but why you're doing it, that it's easy to perceive. It's easy to perceive when I talk to you. It's easy to perceive when I taste your food. No one's going to taste your food and not think there's a story behind it. It's not a McDonald's burger. It's not fast food. It's not somebody trying to make it to the customer's liking. I have a story to tell, and the way I've learned to tell it is through food, which, as I've told you, I think is the most intimate experience you can offer someone, is cooking for. I mean, even just everybody has a way they make a burger.
Yeah.
And just making someone a burger, the anticipation and the anxiety you can feel as someone who's not a super skilled chef, that might be their story, that this is how my dad taught me to make. And I think that's really impactful. And I'm so looking forward to Vinai when it opens. How do you even begin? Because, oh man, this is like got me a little bit. It's heavy. In a way, it's almost, I don't know if you call it a burden or a motivation, that I want to tell my parents' story.
Yeah.
With that in mind, how do you even begin to be like, this is what our brunch menu is going to look like?
Yeah. As long as when people come in, we treat them fairly, we treat them well, we respect them. I think that it starts there. And I feel like the food is like the condiment to that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, those are like, the main dish is hospitality. And the food then becomes the side dishes. You know what I'm saying? So like, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it does matter.
Yeah, of course.
But like the food is extra. When you're having a great experience, like you and I both know.
The food is a part of the experience, is not the definition of success of coming into Vinai is not, I had a dish, I liked how it tasted. Yeah. That has to be a part of it, is what you're saying. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. It's a part of it, but it's not the main part. Yeah. You know, like, it's a restaurant.
That's wild to hear.
It's a restaurant, and we do food, But that's why I think that restaurants have to start thinking of it as when we have to look at restaurants as a whole, right? Like, for example, with Folly. Like, and what you guys are doing, and you guys are opening this genius bar. By the way, liked your little Steve Jobs thing. Like, you know how you guys are doing that? Yeah. Like, it's, you guys are sourcing great coffee, and you have some incredible coffee for people to drink, no doubt. But if you can have the best dang coffee out there and be like, hey, here's coffee, have fun, this is really good. People are gonna be like, okay. You know, but what you're doing is you're creating, you're helping kind of with this experience, that they come in and they can ask questions fully, and there's no such thing as a dumb question, and you guys are taking care of them, and it's almost like what you guys created is almost like this. The best way of saying it is just like going to your friend's house and trying a bunch of really good coffee. You know what I'm saying?
I know that's exactly it.
And that connection there that's hospitality, man, and that's so crucial. The best restaurants are the ones that have that hospitality, you know, and they're the ones that are, you know, taking care of people and making sure that all the little things are happening. And so I really think that, you know, that's a kind of going beyond, you know, and so I really think that the food, we could tell people all about like the food and what we're doing, and that's really cool. And some of it might not be some people's cup of tea, you know?
Yeah.
But if we really say, hey, like, you know, like the duck hearts, like the way that we season the duck hearts, we say, hey, have you ever had really good pastrami? Or, you know, do you like eating pastrami? Oh yeah, we like pastrami. We're like, this duck heart kind of has that, you know, it has those flavors of pastrami because of the peppercorns. And they're like, oh, wow, okay. And then if you think of duck hearts, they're basically kind of like little like beef nuggets.
Yeah.
That's what they are basically. And the heart is a muscle, right? It's just a very lean cut of muscle. And the duck hearts are a little bigger, so it's like a little beef nugget that almost tastes like pastrami. And they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then I'm like, oh, but you have those peppery notes. So here's the noodles that go with it. And the noodles or the rice or whatever will mellow that out. Oh, wow. If you talk someone through this and you kind of explain, and kind of when I came over and you guys are, walking me through some of the coffee, then I get it.
Yeah.
And
it's like we try to do the same thing where it's like, do you like dark roast? I'm like, yeah, it's my favorite. And, even our dark roast, like wink, wink, it's a dark roast. Yeah. We're going to use the term you like, but really we're just going to try to find the things you like about it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of our philosophy too, is I love what you said about coming over to a friend's house.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we want it to be. Is you nailed right on the head what I think is one of the biggest problems in high-end coffee is we only focus on the greatest coffee in the world, and we're going to prepare it in this insane way and then give it to you. And then if you don't appreciate it, I don't like you. Like you don't even deserve this coffee because you don't even know what it is. And I think the only way you can grow and get more people excited about not just coffee but food, everything, is if they want to be there. Like no one's going to want to learn if they walk into a place and they're like, I feel uncomfortable. The only people who want to be there are the ones that are more concerned about like what others might think about them and like, oh, am I cool because I'm hanging out here? Oh, okay. We've been going for a minute here, but and we can end on this, is something that really resonated from our first episode that didn't record, but it's been sticking in the back of my mind because I'm like near panic attack every day with the tasting and tour room, just like trying to get people to show up and realizing that it's not as easy as it can look sometimes. And one thing that sticks in the back of my head is your father's story of getting to Vinai. Because, I mean, honestly, I'm not even just pandering here, that there were a few moments where I'm like, yeah, but it's not like Yia's dad. Like, this is tough. This is hard. But, like, it's what you're saying is remembering the past is humbling.
Yeah. So his story of, and then I talked to him, is it's not, it's really interesting, but in the Hmong community, and especially in like a lot of the dudes his age and kind of who went through the war, his story isn't anything too special from that. Like there's a lot of his buddies and a lot of people, they have those same stories, I mean, there's stories of moms who while they were escaping, Laos to try to get to Thailand, that the kids would, one of the babies would be crying, or or some of the kids are too loud, what they do is they would dope them with opium to kind of, to sedate them, so that they wouldn't cry, they wouldn't make noise, so they can hide quietly, so that if patrols come through. It's crazy. It's the length you would go to escape when it comes about survival. So it's like, and a lot of families did that. And it was just, that's what we have to do. So my dad, after the war, during the war, the U.S. pulled out in 1975, and the word came down that, hey, we no longer have U.S. government support anymore. We're kind of on our own, and not everyone's going to be able to be, like airlifted out. A few hundred people got airlifted out, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Hmong people. It was everyone disband. I mean, because at the end of the day, they're militia, right? And it's like everyone disband, go back home. Like, and then so my dad, not wanting to leave his men, because he was I think it was like a lieutenant or second lieutenant or something like that. And so he not wanting to leave his men, he made sure they all were able to go back. Everyone's safe. Then he went back to he went back home. And then when he got back there, since he fought in the war, he kind of knew how to do land navigation. And I was like, well, Dad, how did you know where to go from your village? He goes, well, I had one compass. I had the compass. He was the only one. He said he was the only one that had a compass or something like that. And he goes, I took the compass and I pointed to basically like southwest or south. And he's like, we started walking. And I'm like, oh, were there trails? He's like, no, we just started walking south until we hit the Mekong River. And that took a couple months, and just hiding in the jungles, camping out,
Couple months.
Yeah. And just like, you got to just figure it out. You just got to work the problem. You got to figure it out. They get to the river, and you have to cross the river at night, and especially with no moon, so then nobody can see you. And there's always boat patrols. There's trucks coming down. And so the Hmong people, we are hill people. We're mountain people. So we're not used to like swimming in rivers. The Mekong River is the 9th largest river in the world. So it's like a heavy, good, it's a big river, but then on top of it, it's also a harsh flowing river. And it wasn't like there wasn't a sign like goes, oh, this is the smoothest part of the river you need to go to. You know what I'm saying? It was just you get there, you go. And so when you got there, when they got there, they had to create. So my dad created basically a flotation device. But he took a big old bamboo trunk, and he kind of cut it into 3 pieces and tied it together. It was like almost like a triangle life preserver type thing. And he had a plastic bag, so he put his clothes. He stripped down his underwear, put all his clothes in the plastic bag, and then he had his gun, and he had it in the front, you know. And so he held it up there, and with one arm, and the other arm he paddled. And then people who couldn't swim, they just tied themselves to him. So I'm like, so how did you paddle? He goes, well, you just paddle against the current with one arm, and if you feel like you're getting like pushed one way, you switch arms and you paddle the opposite way. And you just keep doing that until you get across, or the river takes you. So eventually they got across, and then you wait there, and then trucks will come. And some of these trucks are patrol trucks. So if they catch you, they put you in internment camps, or they send you back, or they jail you. And then the NGOs, a group, you know, like the kind of basically, you know, like Red Cross type, you know, NGO groups there from the villages. They would make patrols down there too. And then when they see people, they put them on the boat or put them on the truck and then take them to the village, and then they kind of register you in. And then families were split up that way. You know, people got lost. Many people died. You know, it's like, you know, there are moms who are like, yeah, I had 4 kids. Now I'm down to 2, you know, and it's just what you do. And as I think of that, it's like when you experience something like that, and then you come to America, like, even though it's a crappy situation here, it's worse there. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you've gone through the worst, and then you go to somewhere where it's like, well, it's not as bad as that. You learn to appreciate all the little things. And
it's like the shift from, like, there's always problems in life. There's no such thing as a problem-free life. Mm-hmm. But it's like the shift from real problems to good problems. Yeah. And it's almost like that story of what your father did and your mother made it so that good problems were even a possibility. And I have to imagine that building out a restaurant, I know people who have done it. That is an extremely stressful process. It's very capital intensive, and intensive. And the general rule is, whatever your budget is, triple it. That on its own is an extremely stressful thing. But it's almost like these are good problems to have. And this is the thought that the reason I bring this up is this kept popping in my head the last week. That I'm like, my biggest worry right now is if people are going to show up to this thing that I've been working on for a year and dropped all this money into. It's a really good problem to have. Yeah. Versus two months on a compass. I'm proud that I got here without using Google Maps from 5 minutes away. And so to try to fathom 2 months hoping that this compass is working, by the way, and getting to the river and then waiting for, and hoping that even after all of that it could come down to which truck pulls up. Yeah. And that leads to 10 years at Vinai, which, by the way, is a beautiful, if you want to tell the story any better, you could not have picked a better name for your restaurant. Yeah,
we had all these other like kind of names in my head, and I thought, oh, this would be cool, this would be cool. And then I just thought about it. I'm like, you know what? This restaurant is a love letter to my mom and dad. So it's the place they met. It's the place they had us, you know. It's the place that means so much to our people. You know, Vinai from 75 to 992 hosted 65,000 people. Of that 65,000, 90% of them are Hmong. All those 90%, majority of them ended up here in the Midwest. You know, so it's a name. The name itself, the location itself, is so ingrained into our people's culture and into our history that it plays that role. But then it's also where our family started. So
that is absolutely beautiful, man. Thank you so much for coming in again.
Nah, that's no problem.
Equally as impactful as last time. I think what you're doing is so cool, and I think
thanks, bro.
The thing I appreciate the most is the way you're doing it. I have said this in the past, is that one of my favorite things about having a business is in a way I can choose who to work with, really who not to work with, because it's so hard to find customers. But one of the coolest things is like that external motivation that not only the people working with me or for me, but also being able to work with you and being able to potentially build out this amazing coffee program for Vinai. I now have the burden or the motivation. It's kind of like, I don't know what the word is that combines those two things, that it's like, oh no, we're not just putting together, I just don't want them to have a cup of coffee. I want it to be a part of the experience that's telling your parents' story. And it ingrains this sense of community into me, that it makes it much bigger than just trying to roast really good coffee for people. And that is what I really appreciate about like the lessons you're dropping on here, or just your life story is really cool. And I appreciate it personally, because it gives me a lot of perspective, and it just like, it adds this weird excitement and like nervousness that it's very motivating. And it's, sometimes it can be really hard to find motivation, especially going on month potentially 7 of the lockdown and not knowing everything is, that this has kind of been a really bright spot of getting to meet you, getting to learn your story, and then working with Vinai in the future is going to be just like, I'm so stoked, dude. We're going to,
I'm excited, brother.
We'll put together a killer coffee menu.
I'm so excited.
But that's what's amazing to me, is like, we can talk about something as simple as a coffee menu, but it ties directly to that story.
It has to have depth. Like, I think it's about having depth in like what we're doing. You know, it's not like, here, we made some food, here's some coffee, enjoy. Yeah. You know, there's depth in it. There's history in it, and that depth and that history, like, it's like when I say, well, hey, when you dine with us at our place, you know, if it comes to like, if you're at the trailer, if you're at the pop-up, whatever, like, you're part of our family. It means you're at the table with us. You're part of the family. You know? And
I noticed that at your pop-up of Vinai, that I came up, you were sitting down with someone else that was eating, and then you went over and sat with somebody else that was eating, and then you came over and sat with me, and I'm like, oh, this is like, it's not just somebody that like, oh, yes, made a sale, now go eat it and go leave me 5 stars. It's like, that's not the worry. And I think that's,
I mean, there's a worry in that too. No, that's no, but I think that, again, first of all, I'm able to do that because we have an incredible crew. We have an incredible team that they hustle hard, where they're like, hey man, like, that's what you got to do out there. So we'll do our thing back here. And I love our team. Our team's incredible. And then I think the other thing too is, well, there's 2 other things. One is just, I know that connection with people is very important. And to be able to just talk to people and say, hey, thanks for coming. Like, we really appreciate you coming. And then I think third was just tired too. So I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a good time to go sit down. But that's kind of, we've been able to do that because I've been able to do that because we have an incredible team who takes care of a lot of the other stuff. So
that's awesome. I think we'll end it on that.
Yeah.
I'll end it like I do everyone. Oh, no, I had a random question pop in my head.
Oh, yeah.
Because with Hmong food being more of a philosophy, I'm really curious about this, is if you could only have one kitchen utensil, what would it be?
But be my cleaver. There's my buddy of mine, Nate Zimmerman. He makes knives, and he made me this really cool cleaver. I'm not sure. I thought I showed it to you. I thought I showed it to another friend. I thought it was you, but he made me this really cool cleaver. And in the cleaver, the handle is an homage to Mung knives that are made back in the old land. Back in Thailand and Laos, they have these old school Mung knives, or basically they're like part machete, but like, he made the handle to kind of represent, or the kind of shape and look like that. And it's a really cool cleaver. And I've been learning how to, for the last probably like 1.5 to 2 years, I've been just cooking just with the cleaver. Just, I want to learn how to do everything on a cleaver, you know, because that's what a lot of Hmong families do, or a lot of like the old school Hmong dudes, you know, when they're cooking, it's just a cleaver, and they slice, dice, chop, and do all that stuff with it. So I've been practicing like crazy. It's heavy though.
Yeah, because like a cleaver, really, the intention is to break through bone as you're taking apart an animal.
Yep, it is. But then it's like the way that he shaped the cleaver, like it's almost has like almost a sentoku kind of, you know, like tip to it. So then it's like you can slice and dice, and you can do all that, you know. So it's really cool. I mean, it's so fun. It's my favorite knife.
I'll have to get a picture of that so I can post it when we go live with this on Sunday. We'll post that too, and I'll tag him in it. That's awesome. Well, now I'll finally end it and say, have a nice day. I'm so nervous to hit this button. Is there a memory card?